Hello and welcome to the ILTV News Podcast. I'm Maayan Hoffman, Executive Editor at ILTV News, and I welcome back our viewers and listeners. I have with me today a very important guest, Dan Perry, the former head of the Associated Press for Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Welcome, Dan. So much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Maayan.
Yeah, of course. Now, we're going to have a very serious show today. We've had some very trying videos released over the weekend, Hamas propaganda videos, but really, scary videos of two of our hostages shown starving, shown digging their own graves. Images like this, are traumatic, but it also raises that question again. Are people really starving in Gaza the way that we have been seeing in the foreign press? One of the Hamas videos, and then I'll let you talk, was of Editor David, I think his name is right, who in the video, Hamas is saying he's starving just like our children. And there's been a lot of question marks around how starving are the people in Gaza. It makes sense that our hostages will starve if everybody else is starving. Or is this actually ill treatment just to the hostages? What's going on there?
Well, first of all, there clearly is hunger in Gaza.
Hunger, yes.
The place half of it has been flattened. Economy has been destroyed. It's not by any means self-sufficient. It's blockaded from all sides, and from the sea and from the air. It's under very severe military assault. I don't think food distribution is working locally in Gaza. I know people in Gaza who subsist off a potato that they share, per day. It's obviously dire, and it's not a good look for Israel or anyone else to be quibbling about whether it's hunger or starvation or famine or something else. And some people are, in my assessment, indeed starving for whatever reason. And I tend to believe that some have starved to death. So not a great situation, and Israel should not be in the business of trying to parse the semantics of it. Now, clearly not everyone is starving. You can see very clearly in the videos of Editor David that the people who are handing him the can are very far from starving. Mm-hmm. He is obviously being purposely denied food. That's clear. Mm-hmm. And in that, I would have to say that the Israeli hostages probably are among the few and perhaps the only people in Gaza who are being purposely starved. But it's almost beside the point. It's a propaganda disaster for Israel. It's a moral abomination for Israelis, some of them, not all, thank God, but some of them, to actually be calling for no humanitarian aid, to be vehiculating despicable nonsense like the notion that there are no innocents in Gaza, including children. You hear that from some people in Israel. And it's just awful. So you can't win this propaganda battle. Hamas, I think, made a mistake by releasing these videos because now, of course, they seem to have balanced out the videos of the children who are either starving or very sick or both, I don't know. Now people are talking about the Israelis who are malnourished and so on. I fail to see what they got out of it. Seems like an own goal, as they say in Britain. Mm. If they're trying to put pressure on the Israeli government, then that's weirdly a good thing, because the current narrative seems to be that they feel they're winning the narrative war so much that they don't want to deal. And if they're trying to pressure the Israeli government by means of releasing these videos so the families pressure the government and the people pressure the government and there's desperation in Israel, that would suggest they do want to deal. And in a twisted calculus of our unfortunate situation, that's strangely useful.
Yeah, I was just thinking that as you were speaking, maybe Hamas is actually all of a sudden wanting a deal, though I think what we've seen in the past is so much that we think we're getting there, but it's always actually Hamas, it's from what I understand, that is really stopping it. At this stage, the pressure on the government would just reap more internal chaos than it would necessarily bring us to a deal, I think, because it seems that the Israeli government is even willing to have a ceasefire if we would get these hostages back.
The Israeli government has rejected Hamas's deal from the very beginning, and Hamas's proposed deal from the beginning was end the war in exchange for all the hostages in one go. It is the Israelis who have insisted on different frameworks for a deal where it's phased and you're getting back some of the hostages in exchange for certain number of weeks of ceasefire, and all of that occurred because Israel refused to commit to an end to the war. Now, it's not illogical for Israel to refuse to commit to an end to the war because that would enable Hamas to claim victory.
Right.
We did this, and we've somehow survived, and we're still in power in Gaza.
Right, we've managed to kill, all of these Israelis,
now,
and we've won the
course,
war, and we're going to be getting a Palestinian state.
And, well, that's a whole different issue.
Yeah, we'll
but
talk about
it would be you'd have to be very twisted and truly diabolical to view it as a victory if Hamas, with, 80% of its original forces gone, and half the territory destroyed, and most of the people of Gaza displaced, if that's your victory, just because you continue to somehow lord it over the poor, wretched souls who somehow survived the war and are living amidst all the ruination, that's your victory, you're truly insane.
But Hamas is insane.
And they're going to claim it.
Yeah.
Now, look, Israel doesn't want them to be able to claim that, and that's understandable. But I question whether the price of avoiding that has been worth it. Because A, I suspect it'll happen anyway in the end, and B, the price has been extremely high.
Also for the soldiers that we've lost. I mean, I just think every day I feel like another soldier is getting killed fighting in Gaza while we're still not getting the hostages back, while we're still not being able to destroy Hamas.
It's approaching 1,000 soldiers who died, and tens of thousands who've been injured and traumatized, and almost 2 years of Israel's economy suffering. And, clearly tens of thousands of innocent people in Gaza killed.
Yeah.
Now, this cannot be normalized. That number is unacceptable in a normal situation. It can only be justified by having there be no other option. But there were other options, and this is the sad thing.
Do you think there are other options now? Like, could these videos, as you mentioned, really influence Israeli policy, sort of light a fire under the government itself? You can forget even the people of the government to say, oh my God, like these were Holocaust images. These were images that, they're saying survivors saw them and, really felt that they saw themselves in the concentration camps with how thin and sick these hostages were. Could Israel shift their policy from these videos?
No.
No.
No. Not for the videos alone. Israeli government policy is much affected by a number of things that are disattached from the state of the hostages. One is Netanyahu's political imperative, his calculations to keep his coalition together, to buy time and make October 7th be in a distant past before the war ends and the accounting begins. It's terrible to say that because, by the way, that itself is probably a war crime, to continue a war for your political purposes. Right. The other is the genuine belief, the strategic belief by the far right in Israel, which more or less controls the coalition because without it the coalition probably collapses, that the lives of the hostages are not worth what they view as the risk of ending the war while leaving Hamas in power in Gaza. I think the risk calculation is false.
Well, I think they're also pushing now for this thing of, taking over and having Jewish civilians live in Gaza again, which if you go back 20 years, or to the disengagement of 2005, there was a reason for it.
It would be incredibly foolish.
Yeah.
And yet this is what they want. Now, the far right in Israel, the messianic far right in Israel, is driven by an apocalyptic, hyper-religious, fanatically extreme interpretation of Jewish scripture and Jewish thinking, which I think is un-Jewish.
Important to say, though, that's not the majority of Israelis.
Absolutely.
Right.
But that's
Fringe.
their view.
Yeah.
Messianic far-right Israel is not interested in peace and prosperity. And like Smotrich, the so-called finance minister, is on the record as saying, I'd rather have this than, all the billions in the world. And this is Jewish control over all the territory that was divinely gifted to Jews, supposedly. In ancient times. And by the way, that includes, by some interpretations, from the Nile to the Euphrates River. That's how they think, these people. And by the way, I'm not exaggerating. Their patron, they're the main thinker, Rabbi Dov Lior, actually proposes such extreme interpretations of Judaism. And they're ready for an apocalyptic war.
But Dan, there are some new reports that are coming out, some new ideas that are being thrown on the table. just over the weekend, there was this new piece that came out that said, now Trump and Netanyahu are talking about a different plan, and this is a plan where the U.S., takes control for a window over Gaza and then maybe works with some international partners. Do you think that is viable? Did you see those reports, and do you think that they're relevant to what's happening now? Could something change that way?
With the U.S. Ending up administering Gaza?
Yeah.
Well, look, I assess that nothing good can happen unless Hamas is A, removed from power, and B, made to disarm.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that has to happen like before the war ends. I think it's unlikely that we can compel that until after the war ends. And the more likely scenario, if Israel insists on that, is a guerrilla war for the next many years with Israel stuck in Gaza and people dying on all sides for that entire duration. So I don't think that's great. I think there are wiser ways to go about it.
Yeah.
But I do think that the end game needs to include an elimination of these independent militias, not only in the Palestinian areas, but also in Lebanon with Hezbollah and in Iraq with the Syrian, with the Shiite militias. Of course, the Houthis in Yemen. What is this nonsense? They have militias, hanging around, imposing their will on the governments of sovereign countries, or the Palestinians' case, supposedly autonomous territories. Hamas has to go. And for them to be compelled to agree to these conditions, they have to not only be defeated in the field, which they more or less have been done, but also to create for the Palestinians a tremendous incentive to make Hamas sticking around very unpopular. Hamas is driven by their own popularity still in the West Bank. So if the Palestinians are telling Hamas in every poll, 95% of them, we want you to disarm, and if on the table there is a clear scenario that is promising to the Palestinians, they're not all, jihadist. Many Palestinians, and I think a majority, are as rational as you and me. And if there was a real scenario on the table that was clearly honest and genuine and in good faith versus the continuation of Hamas sticking around and armed where they're going to get nothing, even if the war ends, they're going to get nothing but maybe humanitarian aid. I think that would create a dynamic in Palestinian politics that would compel Hamas to disarm. Now, is that compelling scenario this one, that the Americans come in? I have my doubts, but that's better than Hamas, obviously. And if it comes with, $100 billion in escrow currently from the Gulf countries,
who maybe help govern,
and maybe if it includes, some boots on the ground from the UAE and even Egypt, and the U.S. caretaker role is only temporary, then yeah, maybe it might work. Sure. I think a more plausible narrative for the Palestinians is the Palestinian Authority. And I know all the problems with the PA, believe me. Their educational textbooks are not what they should be, and they're corrupt. And
the people don't respect them. So how do you bring a government that nobody's respecting in the West Bank to Gaza where nobody respects the government?
There's no
We'd
other
have to have some kind of scenario, an interim scenario.
There's no other brand in Palestinian politics.
Right, but you need an interim scenario. I mean, how are these people going to rule when they can't rule themselves?
Do you think that brand is going to be the U.S. who's going to own it?
No, that's why I'm asking. What is the real solution? Because I often feel like we're kind of stuck between this rock and a hard place because we know we need Hamas to go away. Everyone knows that. We know that we need to have new government in Gaza. And then it's like, okay, well, who's going to govern? Is it the U.S.? Is it the regional, Gulf countries? Is it Palestinian Authority? I have
a philosophical answer to that.
Okay, give me one.
In life, mature people have to understand that sometimes you choose the least bad option.
Yeah.
And immature people will say, no, that's bad. All
no,
right, so
you
Hamas,
need to choose the least bad option, but the question is, will it be viable? Will it be viable?
Yeah, it'll be viable.
It'll be viable.
It's viable in the West Bank, it'll be viable in Gaza.
Okay.
And especially as, this time around, compelled by the global historic cataclysm in Gaza, the world will really help them.
Yeah,
and
so?
the reforms will be imposed, and their hand will be held, and the monies will be many, and they will not be given the freedom to be as corrupt as they have been hitherto. It'll be different. So the brand, the umbrella of the PA, with all kinds of reforms and genuine assistance and funding of the West, of Israel, if it's desired, and of the Gulf countries and the moderate Sunni countries, I think is clearly better than anything available. I'll say this. Hamas continuing is
worst case scenario.
Pancreatic cancer.
Yeah.
What I just described is a broken leg.
Okay.
Infantile people will say, well, it's a broken leg. I don't want a broken leg. But if those are your choices, you go for the broken leg.
Do you think that will lead to a Palestinian state?
I think a Palestinian state is conceivable under certain conditions that absolutely include Hamas and any other militia not existing in a territory controlled by would-be Palestine, and the government of would-be Palestine agreeing that this is a state that will be demilitarized.
What does that look like, demilitarized, though, when you're used to – I mean, I'm just picturing, we've had the Palestinian Authority in place. And by and large, there's been actually a lot of coordination, which they talk about, that's been very good. At the same time, as you mentioned, 95% of residents in the West Bank say they support Hamas. And you've got Islamic Jihad and other terrorist operatives, working in those territories. And so we say it's going to be demilitarized, but how do you stop all those militias and all the incitement?
They have to be disarmed as a precondition.
But how do you do that?
You just do it. I mean, the
mean?
Palestinian Authority has its police force. Whoever helps them set up their state may need to help them on a security front as well. But mainly, the existing militias, it was a terrible mistake to allow them to exist, need to be compelled to disarm. And you do that by incentivizing that and de-incentivizing the non-acquiescence to that. And that's a structure that you create, where if they do this, the Palestinians get a lot. And if they don't do this, Palestinians get very little. And the people will have to basically rise up and compel them to disarm. I don't think it's impossible. And by the way, it's happening right now in Lebanon with Hezbollah.
Right, that is true. And actually that's been kind of fascinating to watch, what's going on in Lebanon and how it's actually so much more under control than I think anybody would have expected, this many months after the ceasefire.
But it hasn't started yet, but they're talking seriously about it.
No, it seems
and the
to
idea,
be.
And how are they going to do it? With foreign assistance.
Right.
And that is how the Palestinians want to do it.
But also the Lebanese government seems to be very on top of it now.
You talk to all these tough guy Israeli analysts about a year ago, and they would have told you, no way, the Lebanese government is hapless, and the Lebanese armed forces are a fiction. And I knew back then neither one of those things had to be true. Mm-hmm. The former no longer is the case. The latter is being worked on. It will require great regional determination and focus, and also global assistance. NATO exists for a reason,
right.
And it's not pie in the sky. This is a project that will have to be done, and until it's done, there can be no Palestine. And you asked about demilitarization. That is going to be a pickle, because most countries think that sovereignty means the right to have a military that enables you to defend yourself. I say no. I'm very sorry. The world has countries that do not have heavy weaponry, from Luxembourg to San Marino to Monaco. They're generally smaller, yes, and they're not as impactful in history as the Palestinians weirdly have become. But Palestine will have to be demilitarized, because otherwise there is no way Israel can allow a foreign army to be surrounding Jerusalem on three sides and to be within 20 miles of Tel Aviv, especially in a situation where many of the people there will obviously continue to hate Israel.
Right, certainly for a number of generations, even if there was reform, it would take some time.
So, to that point, and I've written this, the European plan to recognize Palestine before any of this is assured is a mistake. Now, especially in the UK case, they have set demilitarization and Hamas disarming as a condition, so it's not clear if that condition isn't met, will they then not recognize Palestine? It's so confusing what Keir Starmer said last week that I don't know, but I do know this. If the UK and France and Canada and Germany recognize Palestine in a situation where the war is not yet over and Hamas still is armed and has not agreed to disarm, and none of the conditions I mentioned are the case, that will have one clear effect. It will strengthen Hamas. It will validate Hamas's strategy to create this horrible war and sacrifice so many of their own people with this end in mind, that it will ensure that the conditions necessary for a Palestinian state don't happen, by which I mean Hamas gone as a military entity. And therefore, there's a great paradox, because in recognizing a Palestinian state, these clueless Europeans will have assured that for a longer period there will not be one.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild, what you just said. And I think it's really, it's fascinating. But there also are, because there's legal preconditions for being able to have a state. And from what I understand, when this would get, even if everyone says, oh, yes, we recognize Palestine, when it would go to the UN Security Council, they would have to meet the criteria. And one of them, as you mentioned clearly, is that they are there for peace. And when Hamas is in power.
That's not a criterion for a state.
I think it is. It says you have to be a peace-loving country.
To be a member of the UN.
As a member of the UN. But for the UN to recognize them, they have to be a peace-loving country, viable borders, right? We don't know what the borders of this Palestinian state are. are. And they have to have a government in place to be able to govern them. And right now, if Hamas is governing Gaza and the Palestinian Authority is governing the West Bank, there isn't a government that represents all of these Palestinian people
It's a
within
weird
any
one.
potential borders. So it's not even really possible to move forward on the state. And as you said, it will then make it pushed off further because there are clearly none of those things criteria.
The UN General Assembly is a joke that doesn't honor the very principles of the founding of the UN that you mentioned from the UN Charter.
Yeah.
So it almost doesn't matter. The UN General Assembly could declare that 2 + 2 is 5, and it would surprise no one.
Right, for sure. Now, I did see this other, I just want to jump to sort of a different subject for a minute. I saw this report, I think it was on the end of last week, over the weekend. It was about the NGOs that the Biden administration funded. And it was talking about that the U.S. was funding NGOs specifically to overthrow the current Israeli government, accusing the Biden administration of doing that. Then I read, I think it was on actually AP, sort of like a breakdown of why that maybe wasn't true. But I'm curious, did you see that? And do you think that there could have potentially been some kind of American entities working to be able to overthrow another sovereign country's government?
Yes and no. No, in that it's total propaganda.
Okay.
Okay. I've heard the Israeli government and its various, some deniable, some undeniable communications channels, claiming that the Israeli opposition to the judicial overhaul, which was an effort to turn Israel's government into an elected dictatorship, in 2023, that was funded to the tune of $1 billion or something by foreigners. I mean, there's no polite word I can use for that. There's one that begins with a B, ends with a T. It's absolute rubbish.
Okay.
That said, sure, the U.S. government and U.S. aid funds various pro-democracy outfits and NGOs and think tanks all over the world. And with very few exceptions, there are not a lot of pro-democracy NGOs that support the current government of Israel, that favors an elected dictatorship and is dragging Israel in the direction of being a theocracy and a non-democracy. So I have no doubt that Biden wanted Netanyahu gone.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that 90% of the living current or former heads of the security establishment in Israel wanted this government gone. I have no doubt that the heads of all the universities in Israel want this government gone. I have no doubt that the majority of Israeli high-tech wants this government gone. We know very well the reality of who this government, of what it is and what they seek for Israel, and it would eliminate Israel's qualitative advantage over the Arab enemies that Israel has basically ridden to great success over the years and have ensured its survival. This government constitutes, I'm very sad to say, a strategic emergency for the survival of the state of Israel.
But is it ever correct for another government to try to overthrow a foreign government? I mean, it's regardless of whether or not...
Overthrow, I think, is a big word.
That was a big word, okay.
To undermine a foreign government? Yeah, sure, it's incorrect. Is it correct for the president of the U.S. to fire the chief statistician of the Labor Department because the jobs report was bad? Is it okay for Netanyahu to go to Congress and argue against, the nuclear deal with Iran? It was in Israel's interest against a sitting president. Is it okay for Trump to send a cabinet minister to Poland to tell the Polish people on TV the weekend before an election, your far-right guy must win this election, then you'll have a friend in the White House? Mm-hmm. Is it okay for Trump to call the trial against Netanyahu in Israel a witch hunt and to send his ambassador to support Bibi in court?
Right.
I mean, is it okay for Netanyahu to obviously have campaigned against Kamala Harris in the past election? The world is so not okay. The list of things that are not okay
You're just making me sad. But I mean, honestly, do you think that that's something that's continuing now? I mean, it does seem that it's a very unhealthy situation. Could it be that one of the reasons we're not ending the war is actually because, it sounds like Trump wants to end it, and yet on the other hand,
somewhat,
maybe not? Like, what do you think? I mean, even when you hear this U.S. plan, this leaking over the weekend with this report about the U.S. potentially taking over Gaza, kind of feels like the plan of the Riviera we talked about, a year ago already, right? When Trump was, or almost a year ago, 9 months ago, when Trump was coming into office. I mean, maybe Trump really wants Gaza. It's good real estate.
The thing about Trump is that even though he speaks nonsense from dawn to dusk and says many things that are clearly false, unlike you and me, he's gotten himself elected president twice.
Right, so I guess he knows more than us.
He may not be so stupid. What he said about Gaza was obviously ridiculous sounding. But it's not inconceivable that at least a transition period would make it look like it partly came to pass. I doubt it will fully come to pass, which would involve the total depopulation and the building of fantastic Rivieras that he said in February that the U.S. will buy and own. Right. I don't think that's going to happen. But a U.S.-led administration in Gaza as a solution that is maybe in some ways even elegant might. So who knows? I think it's relevant that Trump's base is clearly split on foreign policy. Mm-hmm. Half of them want to abandon Ukraine, the MAGA base. Right. There's a clear split.
Yeah.
The Tucker Carlson crowd, and half of them want to abandon Israel.
Right. Which is also the Tucker Carlson crowd.
Yeah. They see Israel is dragging the U.S. into forever wars. They don't like forever wars. Gaza is looking like one. They might have figured out that Bibi has incentivized the forever war by very consistent. There have been two consistent things since October 7th. One, Hamas saying, we'll give you back the hostages if you leave us alone and stop the war against us. And two, Netanyahu saying there cannot be an inquiry into the stupendous failures of October 7th that I was in charge of until the war is over. So you don't need to be Einstein to figure out this incentivizes a forever war. The MAGA base is not down with that, and Trump historically is opposed to forever wars. He wants a deal, and he wants them done fast.
Right. I mean, and it's interesting. We aren't really going to run out of time soon, but I do want to talk about this concept of October 7th and why it happened, and then go to Iran for a moment. Qatar. It seems... So the war on October 7th, just because you brought up the inquiry that, kind of circles back and forth that we haven't done this inquiry, you don't really know how October 7th happened. There's been all these little reports of, individual communities, what happened here, how the IDF operated or the Shin Bet operated, but there hasn't been a massive, as you said, inquiry into the cause, the catalyst behind why October 7th was able to happen. But Qatar comes in here, I think, because there's this idea that we know that we had the intelligence. We know that. We've already found that out without any major inquiry, that we were aware of the plan that Hamas had. We knew they wanted to carry out this kind of attack. The government, the IDF, the Mossad, the Shin Bet, nobody within individuals, but no body seemed to think this was an imminent threat. And my question was this Qatar? Because it seems that there was a narrative that was being believed that Hamas was not actually going to do this. Where would it come from? How could it be? It's because, as you just said, the IDF wants Netanyahu gone. They're not working together. These bodies are not necessarily coherent. So how come they all believed the same thing?
Netanyahu believed that his policies of the previous 15 years had contained and deterred Hamas.
Netanyahu believed it, but why the IDF Shin Bet, nobody wanted to go against it?
I can tell you that in the weeks and months before October 7th, the heads of the military, Shin Bet, and Mossad were begging to meet with Netanyahu to tell him that the authoritarian overhaul that he's trying to impose on Israel, that was causing millions to go into the streets, and that had sparked a discussion about whether reservists would show up for duty, whether pilots, who are all volunteer, the reservists, would boycott the military, was creating such an appearance of a schism in the country and such an impression of vulnerability that it is inviting attack. They wanted to tell him to stop the authoritarian overhaul because it is inviting attack. Netanyahu knew this was their message, and he refused to meet with them. And the last meeting he refused to take with them was, I believe, in September. Yes, there was clear evidence that Hamas was planning an invasion because they were doing videos about it.
Right, but why didn't we?
And what did they do, by the way?
Yeah.
And this is a mistake of the military, but approved by the government. On October 7th, there were a few hundred soldiers guarding the Gaza perimeter of about 40 miles. Why? Because the military had been largely relocated to the West Bank.
Well, and also because it was a holiday.
For Simchat Torah.
Right, where they thought there was going to be an escalation.
Jewish right-wing, far-right settlers like Tzvi Sukkot were planning to do mayhem in the West Bank and provoke the Palestinians. Entire brigades were moved to the West Bank to keep a lid on that, while we know very well that under orders of the government, the actions of these settlers, which can, it's unfair. It may be unfair, but they're being called pogroms even in Israel on the Palestinians, are being tolerated by the military. There's almost never, ever any arrests. So there's fears that the West Bank would explode with this violence, largely incited by the far-right settlers. And the army was there, and there were a few hundred soldiers left on the Gaza perimeter, many of them female lookouts. Now, that was a reality. And, of course, the government never bothered to build an impenetrable barrier. So there was, barbed wire fences. This was a breakdown that is total. And there is, you don't want to prejudice in an inquiry, but it is, I don't have the imagination to define a possible way how this doesn't lead to a very indicting report about the government and the prime minister and also the military, for sure, that should not have agreed to move its troops to the West Bank that day, given that we knew that there was a real incentive for Hamas to attack. But also, the entire strategy of Netanyahu for 15 years, which was to tolerate Hamas, to allow funding to go to Hamas.
But that had to come from somewhere.
It came from the idea that if the Palestinian body politic is split between Hamas-run Gaza and a Fatah/PA-run West Bank autonomy zones, that helps Israel because they look like they have no agreed leadership and there's no one to negotiate with, and that will help Israel forestall serious negotiations on a Palestinian state. In short, and the phrasing used in Israel, and this is very widespread and not denied, is that at the end of the day, Netanyahu's strategy was that Hamas is an asset, as long as they're deterred. Now, safe to say that blew up in everyone's faces, and in his rage, Netanyahu no longer is acting that way, except the policies of the war, the way in which the strategy of the war, and I'm not sure this is necessarily his intention, but in playing a long game in the war, instead of doing action that would have probably removed Hamas already a year and a half ago, weirdly, it somewhat continues. Because there was a deal on the table a year and a half ago that would have ended Hamas's rule in Gaza, would have gotten Israel peace with Saudi Arabia, would have ended the war, would have
that the Egypt plan?
The Egypt plan for months ago.
Yeah.
There was a Biden plan on the table since late November 2003. And it was in the war, and even then the war was looking catastrophic. Many thousands died, etc. Get back all the hostages. PA goes back to Gaza. Hamas, it looked like, could be compelled to agree to hand over the keys. The discussion would have been the same as today. Do they disarm? If Israel had agreed to all this, there would have been great pressure on them to disarm, for sure, especially with the entire world behind Israel, which it no longer is now that everyone believes 60,000 people have died in Gaza.
Right, which is probably
to have not collected the basket of goods that was on the table for Israel a year and a half ago is madness. It's madness. It's infuriating. And to think that might have happened because of a political calculation that he couldn't pass this through his government of fanatics, ex-cons, and incompetence is dispiriting.
Wow, well, unfortunately we are out of time, and I hate to end on such a heavy note, but I guess we don't have a choice. Dan Perry, thank you so much.
I actually think the war will end fairly soon and good things will come.
Amen to that. Well, that's a better ending. Thank you.
Listen, I'm going to write all about it on my Substack. Ask questions later. I hope people check it out. And it's not all bleak. I write some things that are optimistic as well.
Great. Everyone should check it out.
Thank you.
Thanks.